Done.
Okay, thank you. All right, good morning, everyone. This is the Information Literacy Committee webinar for NILROC, title of which is Data-Driven, Data-Informed, Using Data to Improve the Library. So if you weren't sure, it might be about data. Okay, so presenters today, so myself, Brian Clark, I'm the Technical Services Librarian from Illinois Central College. And Claire, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Claire Ehrlich. I'm the coordinator of library instruction at Carl Sandburg College in Galesburg.
Excellent, thank you. And then the third member of our webinar, Lauren Cosrow, reference librarian at Triton. She got pulled away to a meeting, but we want to thank her for the work she put in to make this what it is, and will hopefully do justice to her information. And if you feel like afterwards you want to contact any of us, our emails are right here. And as you heard, this webinar is being recorded, and the recording and the slides will go out on the NILROC listserv before being put on the NILROC website. Okay, so before we get into the nitty-gritty, let's look at it as a big picture idea, right? So why do we focus so much on data-driven decision-making, okay? So basically in definition form, data-driven decision-making I'll just read it, refers to the systematic collection, analysis, examination, and interpretation of data to inform policy and practice. All right, so the purpose is to take the numbers that we get and interpret them in a way that betters the library and betters our ability to interact with the administration and interact with the administration's needs. All right, so our goal is always to demonstrate how we can contribute to student learning and success, right? I mean, anybody would tell their bosses or friends or anybody who asks, why did you become a librarian? You became a librarian because you want students to succeed in what they're doing and find the information they need to benefit their learning, right? We're here first and foremost for the students. And so what has started to be required is for the libraries to collect data that will help demonstrate and show that we are actually achieving that goal and that dream. All right, so there are several national research studies that work to show on a national level the benefits of libraries, and two of them are the ACRL's Assessment in Action and the GWLA's project, which just continue to show the needs and the trends. And then there's also several projects continuously going on at the ALA level as well. And so there's plenty of national attention to this. But what we want to make sure of is that we focus as well on the local level, right? Because, we could show administration and faculty the national numbers, but it's the local college-specific numbers that are really going to be what matters to those individuals who are looking at partnering with the library and helping us reach that success level. All right, so we're going to be able to find ways to link the retention and success and the information literacy skills that the students get directly to what we're doing with the students to help show our worth. All right, and so then Claire is going to take over and talk about Carly Counts.
Yes, can everyone hear me? I'm going to go with that you can.
Yeah, we can hear you, Claire.
Woohoo! Some of you are probably like me. You attend webinars and conference presentations like this one thinking, what's the version of this cool thing that I can do with 75 cents and a roll of duct tape, because that's what I've got. I'm the only capital L librarian at my institution out of 3 full-time library staff members. So our ability to do big, fancy data analytics projects is really constrained by time, resources, and knowledge. And I know that we are not alone. So that's why I wanted to make sure that everyone's aware of Carly Counts. I know several of you, your institutions are probably already participating. But for those of you who aren't aware, I've stolen a description off of the Carly website, and it's here. And I'll post that link in the chat in just a minute. Carly successfully applied for an IMLS grant to run a training program that's based on assessment and action that Brian just mentioned. Essentially, it's a team-based boot camp for getting started putting the library's data to use. And it's really designed to meet you where you or your institution is at on the spectrum of data collection and analytics. Like I said, we're at the 75 cents and a roll of duct tape end of the spectrum. You might be even further, and this program could still be really useful for you. Brian, can you go ahead and switch to the next slide, please? Thank you. There are going to be 2 cohorts to the program. Cohort 1 has already started. I'm a participant in cohort 1. So I was just at the first in-person workshop a couple of weeks ago. And I showed up in Champaign knowing that my library needed to be doing a better job calculating and communicating what we do and what effect our services had. But I had no idea how to do it. I never took statistics in high school or college somehow. And I didn't know who I should even start to talk to at my institution, and I didn't know how to get those people to want to help me. I'm not going to pretend that after 2 days in Champaign, I'm now an expert, but for just the cost to me was the mileage to and from Champaign. And for that, I'm feeling a lot more confident. I have some skills and inspiration to get started. And in about 6 months, hopefully, I'm going to have completed an assessment project and have information that I can show to the folks in Carly Counts, to my administration, to my students, and to the other faculty at my institution, showing exactly at least one little part of what the library does to help students. So if your institution is participating in cohort 1, I encourage you to find the project lead and ask how you can help. They will probably very eagerly give you things to do. And if your institution isn't yet participating, start talking about applying for cohort 2 at the end of the year when the application's open. The application process is very simple, and the bar for participation is low enough that pretty much anyone can squeeze this into what you do. And I think it's really important. This is something that we all need to be making time to do, even if we don't feel we have the time. We need to make time. This is really important. So I'll hand it back over to Brian.
Thank you, Claire. Okay, so one of the ways that we really need to start focusing is how we go about collecting our data. And so one of the main methods that we do here at Illinois Central College is that we focus when we can on direct student work, right? We want to see what the students are actually doing in the classes, the graded work, because that's going to be the information that is most useful to us, because we know that they're putting every effort that they have into it. And so once we've interacted with them, we're going to be able to work and collaborate with faculty that we already work and collaborate with. Um, and we're going to be able to come up with different ways to use that data. All right. So one of the ways we do is we either do a single blind or a double blind study. And here are the basic definitions from the Sage Encyclopedia of Research Design. But basically, a single blind study is when the participants are kept ignorant of what's going on, and then a double-blind study is where both the experimenters and the participants are kept blind about what is going on. And so depending on what information we're taking and how we're analyzing it, we're either keeping just the students unaware of what's going on, or we're taking all of the student information away and we're keeping us in the dark about what's going on, right? So there are multiple levels of ways that we can interact with that data, with that information, to get the most statistically sound connection to it. But that's just one example of collecting data, and these are just a few more. And it's not at all limited to these 6 or 7 if you count the direct work from the previous slide, because there's so much more than this. But I mean, you want to look at the fact that there's 2 different ways, 2 different main groupings, right? There's the way that we can directly assess student learning by quizzes or assignments and rubrics, or indirectly assessing it through surveys or reflections, or just an info-lit evaluation to see how they understand the tools that they're working with. And so, like I said, this is just a sampling, but it just goes to show that there's plenty of ways to get this started, right? A lot of times, finding a way to collect the data can be one of the first hurdles to overcome, right? But rather than getting worried about it and getting stuck with it, you can see that just starting small, you can often get just with a quick quiz or a quick survey. Sometimes we use whiteboards. We'll throw whiteboards out in the library with a question on it. Totally informal, totally indirect. But if there's a question that we need an answer to, rather than trying to come up with the answer ourselves, we go to the students, right? Because the students are the ones who have the information we need about how the library is functioning. And so we want to pull that data, we want to collect that data from the students in any number of ways that we can come up with. And so once we start collecting that data, that's when we start getting into ethics and privacy. And I'm going to turn it back over to Claire now, and she is going to start talking about the not necessarily limitations, but just framing it the correct way.
Right. So we're all librarians. We all know the importance of patron privacy, and it's definitely something that we do need to be bearing in mind while we're working on collecting and using data in the library. So I've put up here just kind of an outline of the various layers of responsibility that we have regarding the data that we collect and use. I'm not going to go into any of it in too much detail because I'm sure we're already aware of it. But when you're into the thick of a project, it can be really easy to lose sight of things like, oh, we should be careful of where we're storing this, or we should maybe do some training with our student workers if they're going to be helping us collect some of this data. So first, of course, there's FERPA, the federal regulations regarding student privacy. I posted a link to an FAQ document about avoiding disclosure that I found to be really helpful. It does get technical pretty fast, but it explains ways to statistically scrub identifying information out of data before sharing results with others. One common way that they mention that identifying information gets accidentally shared is when certain subgroups of people within your data set are very small. So like if you were talking about a class that had 20 men and 3 women, and you said that 66% of the women in this class improved their grade, it's really easy to deduce who you're talking about in that little tiny group. So to avoid that, most states have regulations on the minimum group size that you can have if you're going to report performance information for that group. In Illinois, that group has to have at least 10 people. So that class, you know, if there were 11 men and 12 women in that class or something, then you could say, you could break it out by gender. You know, this many men improved their grade, this many women improved their grade. If you're, you know, below that bar of 10 people in a group, you can't break your data down into those groups because it becomes a privacy concern. In addition, remember, we have the state's Library Records Confidentiality Act that we have to follow. And beyond those legal requirements, we have our professional ethics. I put a link to the American Library Association's policy concerning patron confidentiality. That's something we all want to follow. And it's good occasionally to just kind of go back and remind ourselves of what it says. And finally, make sure you know about any local privacy policies at your institution. Your college almost certainly has one. And maybe I'd be curious to know if anyone's libraries has a separate privacy policy. We do not at Sandburg, but I'm curious whether that's something we need to be looking into. Does anyone have anything they want to put in the chat about whether they have one or not? Okay, there's at least one other person who's considering it. Interesting. All right, well, that might be something that we discuss further at the end of the webinar, because I'm curious now what everyone's considering, why they're considering it. But we should probably move on. Brian, can you go to the next slide, please? So I've just kind of boiled all of that down to some rules of thumb. And all of these can probably be boiled down even further to tame your inner library hoarder. Just make sure you're keeping a really focused, ruthless eye on what information you really need to answer your question and how long you need to keep it for. If you're studying whether students who use the library study rooms are more successful than students who don't, what's the minimum amount of information you need to collect? Do you really need to know their gender or their race or what time of day they typically come? Only ask for the information that you really need to answer your question. And then everything you're collecting, have a plan in place for when you're going to get rid of it or when you're going to scrub the identifying information off of it. Is it going to be after a semester, after a year? Just have that plan in place going in. Also make sure you're getting students' consent. It might vary by institution, whether you need written or verbal consent. It might vary based on just what your ethical standing on it is. Again, don't share data in a way that could identify individuals. And the one that I have in bold here, to help you with all that, make friends with your institutional research staff. Those folks are paid to know what all these rules are and to help people navigate them within the institution. I know if you're like me, you've had reason possibly in the past week to want to yell at someone, I'm an expert on this. This is what I'm trained and paid to do. Let me help you. Don't make that same mistake with the other experts in your institution. Make use of their training and knowledge. And that's what I've got. Brian, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
All right, thank you, Claire. Okay, so now we've kind of talked about the hows and the whys and the what, but we want to give you a couple examples of the ways that we are looking at assessing our libraries right now. Okay, and so this is from Lauren at Triton. And so what they're kind of doing, looking at their instruction, right? So they have three main areas that they're looking at: resources, space, services, and then they're focusing down on instruction and how it relates to their resources and their services, right? So they've created a big picture of the value of academic libraries and figured out where instruction falls within that. And having that information, then they're asking what the data that they're needing for their decision making. So, they're asking, what do we currently collect? How are we using that data? What do we want to collect? And how do we want to be using that data, right? So it's basically looking at the present model and then looking towards a future model. We want to, following the lines of privacy and following the lines of the model of the value of libraries, we want to make sure that we're getting to the information that we most need and that we most want to have, right? And we need to find a way to track down what that information is. Okay, and so I'm going to move on to model that we've begun at ICC, and we've developed this over the last few years. I don't know how we decided to get in maybe ahead of the bubble, but we saw that there was a need. We were already, like a lot of us, we were already looking at assessing our instruction, but we realized that that was a small percentage of who we were, and we wanted to find ways to assess the entirety of the library. All right, so, and this will be 2 slides long because it's more than can fit on one slide, but we created an overall assessment document called the Assessment of Library Impact. Okay, and we followed the ACRL standards and looked at principles, performance indicators, and student learning outcomes, right? So we came up with 3 principles, and so this is the first one, which is resources. I'm sorry, yeah, three principles. First is the first one, which is resources. So we broke up basically what our library does into 3 main areas, resources being the first one. And for each principle, we then created a separate section for each area that that falls under that, and then for the performance indicators, and then we created student learning outcomes so that we knew how to assess the students to see if we were actually achieving what we wanted in that area, right? So we have, like, so for example, under our principal of resources, 1.4 says the library creates access to material in various physical and electronic formats, which increases accessibility, right? So that's our performance indicator. And then in order to assess it, we say that students access library resources in different formats according to their personal and educational needs to further college learning. Now, we got all of this. We built this 1.4 specifically, the performance indicator and the student learning outcome using specific benchmarks. So we looked at specific areas in the ACRL standards. We looked at specific areas in the ACRL trends and statistics. We looked at specific IPEDs and SSI measures, right? So those were the benchmarks for that specific case. And then we're using specific assessment methods to go through that, right? So we're pulling student surveys, we're pulling database statistics, we're pulling proxy logs, we're pulling holding and circ format from different areas. So you can see, we have both direct and indirect methods of looking at the information to make sure that we have multiple assessment methods for any one area that we're looking at. And from the assessment period, since we have 3 groups, we rotate what we're assessing on a 3-semester period so that we're always looking at one aspect of our library. And so if I click to the next slide, you can see that our second principle is services and our third principle is instruction. And again, we have multiple performance indicators and student learning outcomes for each principle. And then they follow the same lines of having benchmarks and assessment methods and an assessment timetable, right? And so we've created this overall document of library impact that we can at any one time we are assessing some part of our library to then be able to take that data to use it for data-driven analysis and data-driven decisions, which is beneficial because we feel that we've definitely answered some questions that have come up and just gotten closer to what we need to interact with the students in the way we need to interact through our programming, through our space, through our instruction, through all the various ways that we interact with students, and we're able to do that using data rather than just gut instinct, which, let's be honest, we all have a gut instinct on how something's going, but gut instinct doesn't always provide the reasoning and specificity that we need to prove a model or disprove a model as we move forward. All right, so it took a long time to get to this point, and this is just to show that there is a goal that you can get to a place where you can assess your entire library. And the thing is, this is always changing, right? So as we do this assessment and as we go through this, after we spend the semester assessing the one area, we go back and analyze the data and we look and see, again, we ask those questions, what are we collecting? How are we collecting it? What do we want it to say? And is it saying what we want it to say? And if the answer is no to any of that, we adjust what we're doing to get closer to what we're trying to achieve. All right, and we can discuss this further once we get to the discussion section. But at this point, we're gonna turn it back over to Claire for one more slide before we get to our overall discussion, which we really hope will be the majority of what we're looking at today.
Thanks, Brian. So yeah, once we've collected and analyzed our data, hopefully we've come to some conclusions about it. We don't want to keep it to ourselves. One of the main points of all this is making sure that all of our stakeholders know our value. Those stakeholders include administration, but also faculty, students, and maybe even members of the wider community. And this really boils down to knowing your audiences. Say your data shows that students who have a reference consultation with a librarian achieve a higher GPA than students who don't. Nearly all of your stakeholders are going to find that information is potentially interesting, but they're going to be coming at it in different ways. For your administration, you're going to want to frame that as, maybe a request for more reference staff, or at least a maintenance of the status quo. And you're going to frame that as, the library's making this direct contribution towards student success. Support us. For your faculty, you're maybe going to frame that as a gentle prod to encourage or require their students to schedule consultations about research projects. And for students, you're going to frame that as, here's something that successful students do, and it barely hurts at all. You should see a librarian today. It's the same information, but you're presenting it to different audiences. So on the slide, we have some ideas of ways to frame and share your data. If you're not already presenting an annual report to your administration or to your faculty or to your students, maybe you want to start. And there's some great free resources that we want you guys to know about for creating really engaging infographics. Make your data look a lot cooler than just a plain Excel spreadsheet. And if you have, your data really engagingly presented, that could go in a presentation or a report to your administration. You could put that in a newsletter or an email that you send out to your faculty. You could put that on a poster in the library where students can see it and be like, oh, the library is a useful place to be. So those are some of our ideas, which leads us to, like Brian said, what we hope is the most rewarding part of this webinar. What are you doing at your campuses in regards to collecting and sharing data? What ideas do you have? And where are you in the process of becoming a more data-driven library?
And feel free to, if you want, open your mic and discuss directly with us, or if you're more comfortable, put it in the chat. And Claire, if you wouldn't mind leading that, just reading out the questions as they come in, or the thoughts as they come in for the recording.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
While people are typing their thoughts, hopefully, I can share, like I said, we're on the very beginner end of the spectrum here at Carl Sandburg College, but we're starting. And the project that we're hoping to do as part of Carly Counts is we want to assess our reserve shelf, and we want to know, courses where the required texts are available on reserve. Are students in those classes more successful than they are in classes where the required texts are not available on reserve? We'll probably also be comparing that to classes that use OER. Try to get more people onto the OER bandwagon, and also try to get some more buy-in for our reserve collection, both from faculty, students, and administration.
And if you don't have a point that you want to share and discuss right now, I won't flip to it yet, but the next slide is just for questions, and so we'll take questions at the same time. If there's questions about things that we've brought up and we can use that to start discussion as well. So don't feel like you have to share something from your own institution if you want to start just with questions and see where that goes as well. We're interested in hearing from you, because we're just two institutions, well, three including Lauren, but we're three institutions out of quite a number of us here at No Rock, and we want to see how this is working across the consortium and not just from a select few of us.
Okay, so we had something come through on the chat. We're working on assessment of information literacy as a GEO, but we need to move next to assessing library services and resources. And she says the webinar has given her some good ideas for getting started, which is great. One thing that I guess I always have as a question, a lot of the instruction that I do is one-shot library sessions that often aren't even the entire class period. Sometimes I'm just invited for 20 minutes or half an hour. And I struggle because I don't want to take up much of that time with assessing what I've done. But I do want to assess what I've done. Does anyone have like some go-to like dead quick methods for assessing really short interactions? Send questions after the session. That's a good idea. Jane, do you send them like to the instructors to send on, or do you have a way to contact all the students directly? Extra credit is my best friend, yes.
Another method relating to that is the idea of like asking for, like what's the phrase? Oh, okay. The classroom assessment technique of muddiest point, right? So, let's be honest, we go to a class, we interact with the class, and they hear maybe 25% of what we're saying. And so what we need to do is we, assess what it is that the students are still missing. What is the thing that just totally missed them and went over their head, and they have absolutely no idea how to do it because they didn't see us do it or hear us tell them. And so either at the end of the session or on a LibGuide after the session, or even in their Blackboard or course module, we use Blackboard here at ICC, but it can be Canvas or any others. But finding a way to find out what they're missing, because half the time the hardest thing is convincing them that they can still come in and ask us questions, right? So finding a way to find what they're still missing so we can answer those questions and interact with them further.
Definitely. Okay. Yeah, I like the idea, a LibGuide or something that prompts students to input what they didn't quite get. That's a really good idea. We don't have LibGuides here at Sandberg, but I might be adding that to my wish list. Google Forms. Yes, I've used Google Form before. We also, if you're a Microsoft campus, I just learned there's a Microsoft Forms, which works pretty much the exact same way.
Okay, so as we keep pulling in this, discussion questions, the other aspect of this, rather, if they're maybe not questions about stuff we've already talked about, but maybe there's questions about stuff we missed. What are the questions that you feel you still have about data and using data that might not have been covered in this webinar? Because let's be honest, there's still quite a bit out there, and there's more that we could talk about. I know one thing for me as I got more and more into the assessment was learning how to actually build assessment projects. Like, I could find ways to collect the data, but how was I supposed to analyze it? What was I supposed to do with it? And I know we talked about befriending your institutional research, but you also need to befriend your college's assessment committee. Before ICC started broadening out into trying to assess all of our different aspects, the first thing we took on was instruction, and we met with, as a group of librarians, with the chairs of our assessment committee to figure out how we could best assess the actual data and get to the answers we wanted. Because figuring out what data you need to answer the question can be daunting, because there's so much data out there. You want to always make sure you collect the correct data. So, I mean, at this point, we're not gonna just keep you here to keep you here. So, if there aren't any more questions coming in, Clara, I don't know, I think I saw the chat flash.
Yes. Marla asks, are there any good books or articles that might help me to put my thoughts together about assessment and data decisions?
So I feel like the best place to start book-wise is books by Linda Suskie. Last name is spelled Suskie. There's several titles that she's done, but she's really kind of a pioneer for the assessment process in general and collecting data at the higher ed level. And just, looking at that, there's also assessment. I cannot think of the name of it right now, and I apologize, but there's an assessment kind of think tank, if you will, located, I believe, out of U of I, and they publish information. NOLA, it's NOLA is the acronym. And they publish information, I believe it's NOLA. I could be lying to you. We can look it up later, I promise. But they publish information and articles and books regarding this, and just finding how to get started and where you want to collect and how you want to get that information going. But sometimes it can be a little overwhelming. And so just remember to just start small. You know, put a whiteboard in the middle of your library, put a survey at your reference desk, just interact with the students and start by just getting answers from them and building up from there.
Another thing, I can't get my hand on the link right at this second, but all of the projects from Assessment in Action have been published, kind of, so you can kind of scroll through those and see what other libraries did as part of that project. And I know there's a really wide range of what they did and what they got out of it. So just kind of looking through those for some inspiration, seeing people who maybe address the same kinds of questions you're hoping to address and how they did it.
Okay, well, thank you all for being here. Like I said, this has been recorded, and the recording and the slides will be available on the listserv and the NILROC website. And then we do want to promote our next information literacy webinar. It'll be the last one of this school year. And it's going to be discussing collaborating with high schools. And it'll be on April 30th at 2 p.m. And Jason Ertz from COD, Amy Glass from Illinois Central College, and Lisa Pritchard from Jefferson College will be presenting information on that collaboration process. And then we also have all of our references with links to what we've talked about throughout our presentation. So you can get that on the slides as well. And again, we just want to say thank you and hope that we imparted some knowledge that was helpful to you this morning. So thanks for being here.